You are recognized. SB 111 FN.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, introduced Senate Bill 111, authorizing reliability indexing credit pilot program. And I really think that with this bill and several others that we have both in the Senate and the House, that the byword of the year is resilience, and what we can do to make the grid more reliable and resilience, both for potential power outages, of course, given the weather in New Hampshire, but also for peak shaving, which is going to become more and more important as our energy use shifts to the duck curve with more renewable sources and others coming in. And anything we can do for reliability and resilience will save our consumers some money. So this bill comes forward as a concept to be able to find a way to deal with larger scale battery storage that is coming to the state. So we're seeing 100 to 200 megawatt projects, potentially larger, as we have new forms of battery coming forward. And so how to account for these projects in the benefits that they derive. So what this bill will do is to create a reliability indexing credit pilot program, which would allow folks who develop battery storage to have a program for getting credits for the savings that are provided. And if it's demonstrated those savings are there, have some recoverable costs for the investment in the pilot program. So, that's the scope of this. Going to have some, I'll have others who come up and talk about the practicalities of this and why it would help folks who want to develop battery storage. But essentially what you have here are a series of definitions of what kind of storage we're talking about, what are the reliability indexing credits, and then a strike price by which you would determine whether the energy is being saved for the consumers through the use of the battery storage. And then section 2 is when how it's established through Public Utilities Commission by entering into multi-year agreements for up to 200 megawatts, which is the kind of sweet spot right now for large-scale battery, is around the 100 to 200 megawatt area, and then to create the appropriate mechanism if such agreements are reasonable and in the public interest. And then as the pilot program gets underway, then there should be recommended terms and conditions for the pilot program, the investigation of it, and that is the scope of the bill. I do know that there is some thought that we ought to consider this, and perhaps it's going to take us a little more time. Perhaps we'd want to retain it for study. But
Are you okay with that?
yep, I think that this is a concept that we're going to deploy, but it's something that's going to need some close look by all involved. So, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd rather defer now to the more particular discussion to the folks who are most interested potentially in developing this kind of project.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll hear from James Andrews. James, welcome.
Morning, Chairman, members. Thank you. James Andrews, CEO, Granite Shore Power. We are energy project developers as well as independent power producers with in excess of 1 gigawatt of fuel diverse generation, all here in New Hampshire, and in proximity to a lot of grid infrastructure, as many of you know. As energy and energy security, is a topic of important conversation. One of the things is overall, the underlying concern is really reliability, and we've seen that change as we've been transitioning with behind the meter resources, intermittent resources, as aging resources come offline and retire, load growth, and the like. We saw that a couple of times last summer, where we had scarcity events within the ISO New England region. One that was for an extended period of time. And really the grid needs resources that are dispatchable and can respond to those intermittent disruptions. So things like battery storage, I think, are an important part of the solution as we move forward. As I mentioned, that set of factors is, creating conditions that, frankly, the grid operator, ISO New England, has never faced before as well. And really, we need to rethink how we approach operating and planning the bulk electric grid moving forward. To ensure that the grid remains reliable, resilient, and affordable, given that complexity and breadth of these challenges, the region is going to require a wide set of solutions. We believe SB 111 is part of that solution set, not the only solution. In their 2024 Regional Electricity Outlook, ISO New England has made it clear that one of the 4 pillars for our transitioning grid is ensuring that there are enough balancing resources on the system which can supply electricity, reduce demand, and provide other services to maintain power system equilibrium. Again, as I mentioned, we believe that energy storage is going to be key resource for providing many of those balancing resource services in the future. And energy storage devices provide second-by-second response and flexibility to systems operators' needs. It also has the ability to effectively reduce demand at peak and deliver low-cost power to the system when it needs it most. SB 111's pilot program is the first step to ensuring the assets are built in New Hampshire and deliver these services in New Hampshire for New Hampshire ratepayer reliability. So how would SB 111 work? SB 111 would create a framework through this pilot program that would authorize the Public Utilities Commission to allow New Hampshire electric distribution companies to enter into long-term contract agreements with project owners for energy storage that are providing reliability services in ISO New England wholesale markets. Under these contracts, the energy storage projects would participate as resources in ISO New England and in the wholesale markets, and all of those revenues would be offset against what that strike price is needed for the resource. New Hampshire's electric distribution companies would compensate the asset for the reliability indexing credits at the dynamic price. So really, as a resource, you're bidding in a competitive marketplace to say, this is what, as the owner, this project needs for revenues, and it's competitive against all other projects. Whoever sort of is awarded those then participates fully in the wholesale markets of ISO New England. So not just capacity, energy, ancillary markets, all forms of revenue. That gets offset against sort of what that strike price is that's set for the reliability credit. And to the extent that there's a deficiency, the ratepayers would sort of fund that piece. If the wholesale revenues are in excess of that, the project pays and it goes back to the ratepayer. So there's a real sharing. It's not fully borne. There's not full risk on the ratepayers to this program. It's truly, as the markets perform, the ratepayers can benefit, or the ratepayers, have support for these projects from a reliability perspective and the value they're getting from the reliability of the project. So, in conclusion, I think, we recognize this is a complex undertaking for sure, but we also, strongly encourage that it be considered as an important part of solutions as we go forward, and be proactive with what we're facing in terms of the need for, dispatchable generation supply. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
Yeah.
Senator Waters.
So thanks so much, Jim. And so the kind of core of this is that this credit program would be a method to produce competitive interest in providing the storage capacities. And therefore, with this marketplace, the consumer would potentially get the best deal among those who are trying to provide the service.
That's correct, because what would happen is any project developer, with a storage project would put in a bid to the utilities, and then the utilities would select the most competitive bid out of that competitive process.
If I may, yeah. And so the real savings here, I mean, I think back to a couple of years ago, when we had the extraordinary price spikes when the weather was like this or worse. So the potential for real saving here is that, any number of hours that can be avoided to go into that spot market is going to produce some real savings.
It is, and these type of resources, will serve to shave the peak, as you mentioned, but also, when there's actually load need in the middle of the day, so resources, can remain balanced in the overall bulk grid. And to be clear, this is a generation issue. This isn't a transmission reliability issue. This is solely having the right types of generation supply to meet the changing demands of what the grid has.
Thank you.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Couple questions. My overall knowledge on the subject somewhat limited, but I did own a Radio Shack for a number of years, so sold my share of batteries. If you could help me with, so this is a storage facility. Power comes in, power's stored. Is it unlimited how long that power can stay inside that battery, or does it need to be transferred out in X amount of time?
So I think each owner and developer may operate their battery or may choose to use different types of battery technologies. Specific project that Granite Shore Power is looking to advance from a storage perspective is lithium-ion batteries. Currently 2 hours just duration in terms of discharge. We would, charge that in off-peak time from the grid and then discharge it to shave the peak at peak demand. That could be upsized to 4 hour, a 4 hour discharge to the extent that made sense. But this is really a resource, again, why I think the bill opens up to sort of all forms of storage, which is one that sort of serves to shave the peak day in and day out. Again, I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all in terms of what the solutions are needed. I think this is short-term duration is one technology that I think will be appropriate and be useful.
Well,
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, once again. Mr. Andrew, thank you for my second question. So I believe you may have already answered this. So these are going to be charged from power coming off the grid. These aren't one source,
Yeah, right now,
solar, something else.
again, I think the way there's some developers might pair a solar project directly with a storage project. This one, one that we're advancing as Granite Shore Power is just a battery only project that would be interconnected to obviously the bulk storage, bulk power grid, and it would charge in off hours at off peak times when there's actually really a growing need for demand to keep other resources online for reliability. And then it would discharge, at afternoon peaks when that's needed most.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Elms? Is Dan with you?
Dan's with me.
All right, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Deputy Commissioner Chris Elms of the New Hampshire Department of Energy, joined by our Regional Policy Director, Dan Phelan. The department is neutral on the bill. We do have some concerns. Those concerns are both rate or cost focused and just frankly administration of the bill as written. I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit more about the cost concerns, but we do have concerns that, you know, Jim, before Jim and I have had many conversations about some of the issues that we're facing here in New England. I think we're in agreement on a lot of the broad questions. The answers to those questions are sometimes different, and I think in this case, this is one where we would love to see more information and more data before we set out on a state-specific mechanism to, incentivize storage resources. I think we have concerns that the mechanism contemplated in Senate Bill 111, by decoupling from the market, doesn't actually incentivize the peak shaving behavior that is purported. And so we would love more time to work with stakeholders and the bill sponsors to kind of get to the bottom of how do we actually incentivize what we want to do and not just incentivize discharging as much storage no matter the time of day where it's not necessarily helpful to ratepayers. So we would certainly appreciate more time with that. And on the time front, looking towards the end of the bill, this bill is relatively sparse in its requirements and leaves a lot of that to an investigation by the department and presumably decisions of the Public Utilities Commission. The time frame contemplated, assuming this bill gets passed sometime in May, June, July, does not give us a whole lot of time to do the necessary work that would go into that investigation, and that might involve the hiring of consultants to the extent that we don't have in-house expertise. So more time would be helpful there.
So would it be helpful if we just re-referred it?
That would be helpful.
Perfect.
Dan, do you have anything to add?
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Are there any other states that do something like this?
New York.
So so one of my two major concerns with this is that this is similar to a program that was found to violate the Federal Power Act under Hughes v. Talon, a United States Supreme Court case. In that instance, a resource was set with a contract for differences where the resource would bid into the market and then be paid the difference between the contract price and the wholesale market price by the state of Maryland. The Supreme Court found that that was setting the wholesale rate and was not allowed under federalism. So that's one of my concerns, and we would have to address that under some sort of investigation of how we could construct something that would stand muster in the courts.
Doesn't New York do something similar to this?
New York has ZREC programs that have been found to not violate the Federal Power Act. So that's a potential area that we could explore. But as described here, I'm concerned it wouldn't be able to pass muster.
Further questions? Senator Waters.
Thanks. I mean, I do hear the advice to retain this and fine. But I just thought I would follow up with a question about what you were saying, Chris, about the making sure that the discharge is done at an appropriate time. And so, it does seem to me that that's something that could, you'd think that the behavior of the company would be that they want to make money when they can get the most for the power. But what you'd like to see is some kind of regulation around that would define those times at which essentially you're saying that the credits would be distributed if it was done at a demonstrable time frame that produced certain savings because it was to shave peak. Is that?
Yeah, so the definition of the reliability indexing credit in Roman 3 on line 10 says that it would be for each megawatt hour of capacity. It's a little unclear if it means capacity or energy, but I'll assume it means energy. And since the resource is being paid for every megawatt hour that it produces, that's not an incentive to save the power for peak periods. That's an incentive to turn your battery on and off at every possible moment.
Gotcha.
And so we would need some rules around there to better govern the behavior of the resource.
And if I may,
Follow?
one of the reasons I structured this bill the way I did was because it's a pilot. And it would find some things out, and then the study would be coincident upon the pilot. And so wouldn't it be fair to say that, you know, if we move forward with something like this, we're likely to do it, I mean, we like pilots, right? And I mean, I think that would be the kind of the thing, is that it would be a pilot, that, so it would not be a wholesale opening of the barn doors, but it would be something from which we would understand how these mechanisms work and could make some changes. And it's hard for me to see on something like this how we won't start with a pilot in that.
Sure, and you know, I think, Senator, it's a good point, and you know, I think we've had success looking at pilots in the past. You know, from our view, 200 megawatts with a multi-year contract is an awfully big project, and does have you know, the potential for stranded costs, even if it is limited to that pilot project. So you know, that's just something we want to make sure, and especially if we know right up front that the incentive mechanism might need better fine tuning, we'd want to take time to even get the pilot right, because we have seen that pilots also can have significant costs associated with them.
If I may. And as you know, I mean, there is at one point, I was going to put the two bills together, but there's a companion bill that has a fuller study of this. And I guess that I don't think we have a whole lot of time to solve some of these problems, given what's happening with reliability and storage. Isn't that fair to say?
You know, it is a good point, and it's something that we've heard both in bills before this committee, bills that are upcoming for this committee, and over in the House. We just testified on a bill yesterday about, you know, an investigation of the department to consider leaving ISO New England or pursuing alternative regulatory structures. We're looking at, you know, utility ownership of small modular nuclear reactors. There's a lot of, I think, energy towards exploring alternative regulatory structures. I think that's something we might want to take a thoughtful, holistic approach to, so that we aren't doing sort of a piecemeal, we hope this works, we hope that works, and then we find out our ratepayers are crying out for relief, and we haven't discovered the thing that actually gets it done. You know, looking down to Connecticut, we've seen that real difficulty that can arise when, you know, their legislature has taken a lot of actions, and then when the consequences come around, the cost consequences, they've been saying, well, what the heck is going on here? Let's blame Eversource and call it a day. And when you see, you know, credit downgrades happening there, when you see the costs that are associated down in Connecticut, our thought is just, let's make sure we are looking at these things before we commit to spending the money.
I am a native nutmegger, so don't diss my state too hard.
It's
okay?
a wonderful state. It's a wonderful state.
Hate driving through it, though.
Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to talk on this? Going once, going twice. We will close the hearing on SB 111. My bill's next, but you want to exec it real quick?
Whatever you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
Let's just exec this one real quick. Motion to go to exec.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none.
I'll move we refer 111.
Second. All discussion? All in favor of re-refer?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
Consent. Second.
All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Senator Waters, seeing how it's your bill?
Oh, I'd be delighted.
Wonderful. Is there a motion to move out of exec? Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Thank you. We will now hear from the wonderful senator from District 12.
Who could that be? Who could it be?
All right, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 112 and recognize Senator Avard to introduce. Good morning and welcome to Energy.
Thank you, Senators. Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard. I represent District 12, and I am the prime sponsor of SB 112. So as the prime sponsor, and I appear before you in support of this bill, SB 112 is designed to expand upon the type of electric generation that can be considered for a purchase power agreement under New Hampshire RSA 37411. Like the current law for purchase power agreements, PPAs with existing energy sources will be an option for distribution for distribution utilities, and if this bill is enacted. In other words, the enabling act of RS 37411 will be extended to all sources of energy. The current process involves a request for proposal that includes the Department of Energy, the public PUC, and utilities operating in New Hampshire. Consideration in any decision for the approval of purchase power agreements, and among others, whether it is cost effective for ratepayers, or we use sources that are expected to be available during long-term duration storms, and it fosters price stability to help reduce market volatility. Basically, in closing, this is just another tool in the toolbox to do our best to address the challenges in New Hampshire of having some of the highest electric rates in the country. And I'll defer any questions on this to some people that are a lot smarter than me in the back, but if I may. But I just think this is another option for us, and it's not really a complicated bill, just opens up the door for other resources, in essence.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, Michelle Gardner and Bruce Berkey, you want to come up together? Morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Senator. We have copies of written testimony that we'd like to submit, I think, into the record, but I'm not planning on reading that directly, just in the interest of time. I just wanted to make a couple of high-level comments. My name is Michelle Gardner. I'm Executive Director of NextEra Energy Resources for the Northeast, and I have had this position for about 12 years. NextEra Energy Resources is the owner and operator of the Seabrook Station, located here in home to the Granite State. It is a 1,250 megawatt baseline nuclear power plant that provides low-cost, reliable energy. I only have probably two high-level comments I wanted to make. As I mentioned, most of my testimony is contained in the written document. As I mentioned, in the Northeast, which I covered, New Hampshire is not alone. Across my region, which extends from Maine down to West Virginia and Maryland, I think a lot of states, whether it's commissioners, whether it's policymakers or legislators, I think are really struggling in the energy space nowadays. And part of that is that it's an extremely complex industry with multiple jurisdictional levels. And folks, I think, are really struggling with electric bills, ensuring that we leave the lights on, and concerns and calls from constituents about high electric bills. So New Hampshire is not alone. But New Hampshire is unique, as I mentioned, because it is home to Seabrook Station. And within this region, within New England, we are home to 2 nuclear power plants, which I believe Senate Bill 112 will now give the state the ability to enter into a power purchase agreement for Seabrook, along with any other resources that choose to compete. This bill, as we mentioned, would provide, policymakers would provide the Department of Energy the ability to enter into a solicitation, potentially with other states. Last year, both Connecticut and Massachusetts passed legislation that would enable contracting. In Massachusetts, it was clean energy, which expressly includes nuclear. In Connecticut, it would be a nuclear procurement. We don't believe that New Hampshire should be left out of this if the rest of New England decides to move ahead with the multi-state RFP. And that is really the genesis of why we're before you today. I think, as the senator mentioned, this is a tool in the toolbox for the state. And then my last comment is we are entering, I think, an environment where both concerns about high electric rates, and as we think over the next decade, the next 2 decades, a couple years ago when we saw the conflict in Ukraine, we saw a significant uptick in commodity prices. And since then, I know there's been a lot of efforts to try to manage that type of pricing. That's a lot of volatility in the market. So to be able to enter into contracts and secure supply at a standard rate provides tremendous upside to prevent any other scenarios as we look forward in the next decade. I appreciate the time here today, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I believe Bruce wanted to add a few additional comments on the legislation.
Yeah, if I may, for your record, I'm Bruce Berkey with Sheehan Finney Capital Group and representing NextEra Energy Resources. And we, in reviewing the bill in preparation for today, we saw a couple places in RSA 374.11 that could use some further amendment to allow for the law to be consistent throughout that statute. And in particular, we felt it was important to add the Department of Energy to the development process of the RFP. And so we'll be offering an amendment to that end. And then there were some dates in the process that were limiting that a RFP would have to be developed by June 30th of 2025. And so we're going to offer the notion of deleting that date limitation. And then there's a second date where it would be adopted, and that date would also need to be adjusted. And then the other amendments that we'll be offering to make it consistent with Senate Bill 112, there were two sections in the law that had a cap of 2 million megawatt hours. And so we would offer an amendment to either delete that cap as it is in Senate Bill 112, or to offer a different number so that the state has some flexibility looking forward and going into this process. As Michelle and I have talked about this, NextEra, I don't want to say doesn't care about the cap, but they think that there should be some flexibility built into that number. If it's 2 million, might be too low, might be too high. But we think that it should be some flexibility built into that process.
What was the first, your first suggestion
For
on the amendment?
We're going to add the Department of Energy into the development of the RFP process with the utilities.
And dates be deleted and $2 million cap. Okay.
Yeah.
Questions from the committee?
And I'll draft up that amendment and get that to the committee.
Yeah, send it to Max. Yeah. Senator Rosenberg.
Thank you. So every year, I get these letters from the gas company saying, you want to lock in a price for the year. And it seems like it would require a crystal ball to determine whether that was going to save me money or cost me money. As I understand this bill, this would be a bigger crystal ball because it would lock in a rate for more than possibly 20 years, whether or not that was gonna save the consumer money. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. One additional thing to consider, because our company, in working with a number of states in New England, have gone through exactly the type of analysis that you've gone through. And you're exactly right. You could run any number of scenarios of predictions, and there may be years where it was a good deal, and maybe there's years where it was a bad deal. So you're right to think about it that way. But I did want to add one more, which is, given the current environment that we're facing, with dwindling supply and not a lot of solutions on new supply coming in, as well as increased demand, including from data centers and other buyers of energy, I do think there's some reasonable predictions about as an example of what the next 10 years could look like. So most economists in power market modeling can get some reasonable certainty that while they can't predict any one year or any one winter or any one summer, they can get some reasonable predictions of what pricing could look like over the next 10 years. The last comment I wanted to make is that while there could be years where maybe it wasn't a good deal, the delta is much smaller than when it's a good deal. And by that I mean the arrangements can provide significant protections against the unknowns. So if there's another conflict in Ukraine or another world event that has a significant impact on commodity prices, which are very highly correlated with power pricing, the upside is magnitudes larger than any downside. And we found through modeling multiple scenarios that trend to be consistently true. And so that's why really one of the values we see here is market volatility and predictability for consumers.
And while the Department of Energy is involved in the process already under current law, we also wanted to include them in the process of the development of the RFP too, so that there's, as many eyes looking at this as possible.
Well,
So the only thing I can compare this to is taking out a 30-year mortgage, where you're basically saying, I have predictability. But you always, as the homeowner, have the chance, if rates fall, to pay off that mortgage and refinance your house. That wouldn't be allowed under this, would it?
The way I want to answer that is, as part of this process, this legislation will enable policymakers and utilities both to look at awards and negotiate. Connecticut's legislation was 3 to 10 years in terms of how they're viewing a timeline. Massachusetts was 10 to 20. There are pros and cons and trade-offs of the different term lengths. So there's an ability to say, and not every state needs to decide the same term length. So as part of the awards, there could be a decision in New Hampshire to say, this is how we evaluate the benefits. It's cost effective. We think the right term is 10 years, or we think the right term is 5 years, or maybe we think the right term is 20. But that would be part of the regulatory process and analytics.
And current law has the cap at 20 years
Right.
as a maximum.
Thank you.
I do agree with you. I don't want to necessarily contract for anything at 30 years. Even eggs.
Well, thanks for coming in today, and appreciate your testimony. You talked a little bit about regional impact too, when, we in New Hampshire are experiencing very high energy prices, as we all know. We're always looking for tools like this to kind of help to lower those. And, part of our long-term outlook is we need more energy generation in the area, in the region, and we'd love to house that in New Hampshire if we're able to. Do these purchase power agreements sort of help a company like yours to be able to look at maybe wanting to invest more dollars into energy production into New Hampshire if you sort of have the stability of knowing you have these as a tool?
Yes. I think New Hampshire partnering with other states, committing and demonstrating its investment in Seabrook, I think is a very positive signal about the value of Seabrook to the state of New Hampshire. And we are always evaluating as a company new opportunities. We are one of the largest capital investors in the country. And so we're always looking at new opportunities. I know there's been a lot of discussion around new nuclear and a lot of interest there. And so that is something that we continue to evaluate as a company.
Well, we would love to have you invest more in energy production in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Good. Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Thibault. So, just, kind of looking back just a few years now, I think that the impetus for the original procurement plan was from Senator Avard, primarily based upon what we saw as the huge spikes in natural gas costs and how we were strapped into the mandatory bidding times of PSNH when they had to go into the market. And so this bill is a response, but would it be fair to say that in terms of protecting the New Hampshire ratepayer, that this kind of contract potentially with a facility now enabled by this law, like Seabrook, would be one of the best ways that New Hampshire can ensure itself that it has a power supply that's not subject to those spikes?
That's exactly right. We are a nuclear facility, not dependent on fuel pricing. And so that's exactly the bullseye. It would protect against any type of volatility in the market and create security and predictability for ratepayers.
And, yeah, would it be fair to say that, since it looks like, even though it's under contract, the 8.3 gigawatts, about 7 Seabrooks in the Gulf of Maine is now off the table as a new energy source, that, and solar will grow, but not a whole lot in terms of what we need for energy supply, that if New Hampshire can't secure over a longer term what is an existing supply, that we may be forced more than other states into that market, which hasn't done procurements. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we'd be more likely to have to bid into natural gas produced power, which is most volatile.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if I may follow up another one. We had some conversations already, but I, had several conversations with Governor Healy over the last year, partly resulting from what happened with its attempted agreement with Millstone. And Massachusetts has changed its statute to include nuclear in what it must get under its renewable portfolio or clean energy needs. And so they might have considerable interest in purchasing much more of Seabrook's power, which could potentially leave us, if we don't have this bill, without a vehicle to counter such a move. Is that more or less accurate?
That is correct. So with Connecticut's legislation reintroduced and passed last year, and then, as you note, the significant move in Massachusetts to procure nuclear or create legislation to procure nuclear, that would be my concern for this state, that Connecticut would issue a multi-state RFP for clean energy, including nuclear, and New Hampshire would not be able to.
I mean, Massachusetts would.
It would be, so it could be any multi-state, Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Mass, and I wouldn't want New Hampshire to not have that benefit of participating.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
So to follow up on that, this bill would basically guarantee Seabrook a revenue stream. But is there anything in here that would direct New Hampshire ratepayers or the distribution utilities to get priority over Connecticut or Massachusetts? So how would we know that we would benefit from the guaranteed revenue stream Seabrook would get? How would we know we'd get priority? And how would we know that you would invest more into production in New Hampshire? I don't see anything in this bill.
I appreciate the question. This response may sound controversial. I don't know if you want to put a priority in this legislation, and here's why. This enables a process to move forward. It would enable the Department of Energy to work with colleagues across state lines and solicit bids. It would be at that point that I would want as a rate, I'm a ratepayer here when I ski, not, I do reside in Massachusetts. It would enable the Department of Energy to evaluate those bids on a cost-effective basis and determine what is in the best interest of ratepayers. And there could be scenarios where the Department of Energy decides that it is not in the best interest of ratepayers, or there's a portion that perhaps is smaller or kind of right-sized for this state. And so you may or may not want a priority in that case. I would rather leave it to the department and then ultimately the utilities to negotiate a contract that would be then submitted to the commission for their own determination of whether it's a cost-effective and good deal for ratepayers. So my concern with adding a priority for New Hampshire is that that might upset that delicate kind of cost-benefit analysis that both policymakers and regulators would then go through and be enabled because of this legislation.
Any further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
So from the department, Chris and Dan. You should have your own podcast.
Well, we have a good podcast already. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Chris Elms from the Department of Energy, joined by Dan Phelan. So again, the department is neutral on Senate Bill 112. The legislature is free to procure electricity in New Hampshire as they please, and we aim to implement policy decisions as effectively as possible, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about our strong concerns for the ratepayer impact that is associated with power purchase agreements. This bill is a major expansion of the authority for electric utilities to enter into PPAs, purchase power agreements, in New Hampshire. PPAs are essentially ratepayer-backed contracts with electric generators, and they've been a major tool in the toolbox for southern New England as they pursue their decarbonization goals. New Hampshire does not have any sort of decarbonization goal or carbon emission reduction goal, and our use of power purchase agreements in New Hampshire has been less common. However, as mentioned before, the legislature did in 2023 create a limited power purchase authority with Senate Bill 54, which, as mentioned, was adopted in a time of great price stress in New England and in New Hampshire. At the time the bill was being drafted and considered, we were dealing with those spikes because of the invasion in Ukraine for the most part. But we all came together, we negotiated a limited authority. And part of the department's concerns at the time were what led to the limitations that this bill would remove, the cap on resources, the cap on the size of the resources, limiting the time scope where we could enter into these PPAs, and limiting it to new and incremental resources were important things to the department. We do recognize we have a building things problem in New Hampshire and in New England. We want to make sure we have the resources we need. In light of recent price stabilization that we have seen, we are concerned that this bill could represent significant costs without actually incentivizing new resources. And due to the long-term nature of PPAs, these consequences, as Senator Rosenwald noted, could be borne by ratepayers for a very extended period. There are examples of this. We've heard about the alleged benefits, and they would be nice to think about, but our concern is that we have a millstone tied around our necks. In 2018, Connecticut started paying for their PPA deal with Millstone and Seabrook. That deal has been extraordinarily costly in the state of Connecticut. I'm sorry to pick on the state of Connecticut again, Senator, but we saw the numbers broken down in an article a couple of weeks ago. In the 5 years of the contract, Eversource has accrued something like $600 million in costs in Connecticut associated with that deal, and that's after taking into account the $230 million that they saved in the year of the invasion of Ukraine. So again, that's 600 million down after saving $250 million. It's a lot of money. And it shouldn't have to take historically high prices to momentarily make money. We've been burned by PPAs in this state. You know, we recently have had the conversation around a certain biomass generator in northern New Hampshire. We've heard how that plant needed a PPA to survive, and if we didn't, the North Country economy would collapse. That PPA was finally ended. We said enough is enough, and that generator is still running today. The risks here are not limited to direct costs. There are long-term market impacts associated with out-of-market procurements. Power purchase agreements distort and weaken energy markets. Markets use, the pricing power of competition and the laws of supply and demand to drive investment to least cost solutions. Out-of-market subsidies distort those markets by inhibiting the price signals associated with selecting the most efficient resources. And again, PPAs are inflexible. What sounds like a good deal today might not sound the same way in 20 years. A $60 a megawatt hour contract that might have seemed like a pretty good deal in 2008 would have lost a lot of money with the natural gas revolution that happened in the early 2010s when prices were brought down to around $30 a megawatt hour. We've heard a lot of conversations around what the next technologies might be, whether it's small modular reactors or hydrogen, battery storage. As those become cheaper and more scalable, we don't know what they're going to cost and what we might miss out by locking ourselves into long-term contracts. And as we mentioned before, we want to take a holistic approach to these issues. We do think that the resource challenges we see, and Senator Waters mentioned, difficulties with offshore wind, what we're seeing long-term, there might be an answer that involves, nuclear resources, but we want to make sure we've done the work to see if it is going to be in New Hampshire's best interest. Dan, do you have anything to add to that? All right, happy to take questions.
So you like the bill?
Okay.
You mentioned the cap, and if we can strike the cap and delete the dates and include the Department of Energy, does that take away some of your heartburn?
So the cap was important to us. So 2 million megawatt hours, to give you context, Dan told me the number, about 11.3 million megawatt hours is New Hampshire's annual load. So this represents about 18% of New Hampshire's load under the existing cap. We do have concerns about going above that. We thought that 2 million was a good balance to strike between actually incentivizing a new resource without overly committing the state to a particular resource. The dates were in part because what we saw was a short-term spike that really drove interest in finding something new. As prices have stabilized, we have not seen the utilities move forward with RFPs for those PPAs. A lot of the PPAs that are out there for things like offshore wind, we've seen become uneconomical and get canceled. So the time-limited nature was part of Senate Bill 54 in the context of the prices we saw at the time.
But by adding the Department of Energy to this bill, does that help you out? So that you have more of a say if, okay, this isn't going to be a good deal for New Hampshire, then that nips it in the bud, doesn't it?
I'll let Dan weigh in on that. I think from our perspective, it really is up to the legislature. If you want us to take on that task, we're happy to. Part of the idea with Senate Bill 54 was the thought that we could move faster by having the utilities do it, and we wouldn't have to staff up with the necessary expertise in the department to make that happen. If this is going to be a longer-term strategy, I do think there's a value in having the department more involved, but that might also come with, the costs of finding the right expertise to make sure we can implement that. In the grand scheme of the overall thing, if this is the strategy you want to do, the costs won't be a significant chunk of that, but they will be more than what we do today.
So yeah, obviously, I think we're reacting to this right now. We structured the SB 54 procurement in more of a hedging mindset than a supply mindset. And by raising the cap, by eliminating the dates on this becomes more of a real strategy in our energy procurement approaches. So it may be appropriate to include the department in there. We did think that SB 54 gave us a really great opportunity to look at the final agreement at the PUC and weigh in there. In some cases, it's better for us to sort of hold our fire until we're able to have a better view of the whole picture before the PUC. But it would be an open area of discussion, I think.
Senator Pearl.
I think I'm all set. They sort of answered my question.
Okay. Senator Waters.
So, I wish, you can put a guarantee on price stability, okay, how long it's gonna last? Go right ahead. Wouldn't it be fair to say that this bill is attempting to provide, maybe needs some modification, but a tool in the tool chest? And that, I think the answer isn't therefore the answer to your concerns about other states and other power purchase agreements, that that means we've got to do it our way for New Hampshire, for the duration, the stackability, whatever it might be, to avoid some of those things. And I do think there's some examples of states that have done that.
Yeah, I would agree that it's a tool, and it's a tool that if you give it to us, we would have discretion to use. I think it is a tool that we've seen in New England be used and mostly in a way that costs folks more money, and usually to achieve goals that New Hampshire doesn't have. So, we're not saying you can't give us the tool. We just want to make sure you're aware that the tool is often used in ways that haven't been necessarily in line with New Hampshire's approach.
So if I may just follow up on part of what Senator Avard was saying, is that it seems to me there's two things here. One was the cap issue, but then the second was the nuclear issue. And it doesn't seem that if we basically do the inclusion of nuclear, that's not an issue.
I think nuclear as a resource is something that we would imagine could and would be welcome to bid into that new resource. And, I was talking about this with some House members yesterday, the idea of, a Seabrook 2, or what might an SMR look like. And I know our friends from NextEra would weigh in on that. If this is incentivizing a new resource, it might be a different conversation, right? But this is not what this seems to be aimed at.
So just to follow up, though, that word existing is the key to this bill.
I would agree.
In terms of, for everything but the practicality of it, the existing here means the nuclear.
So it would open a procurement up to other types of resources in the region that also are experiencing financial difficulty. The department did express a desire to get new things built under SB 54. That was part of the objective. We didn't make the determination that we should open this up to everyone because folks have opportunities to make money in the market as is. And if they are not able to do that, then the laws of economics are telling them it's time to go, and we weren't going to argue with that determination. So opening this up to existing does open it up to potential stranded costs and getting resources that are near the end of their life on the books for a very long time.
Well, if I may just reflect that, on the one hand, we wanted new resources, and the other hand, our regulatory framework in the state, as Chris Elms noted, was do not build their state. So I don't know what to say. Maybe some existing aren't so bad.
Senator, it's a very difficult problem, and it's one that we really want to make sure we're addressing in a holistic way. Dan spends 90% of his time just working on these types of issues with the other states. There's a lot of smart people working on it. They are very difficult issues, especially balancing New England's policy goals with just our reliability needs and everybody's shared goal of having affordable electricity. So,
thank you.
Senator Rosen.
So if we involved the department in this process, would you have the resources, and I'm speaking of the human resources, or would you be coming to finance and asking for positions?
That's a very good question, Senator, and I'm sorry I don't have the statute in front of me, but we do have abilities within our existing statutes to hire consultants and assess those charges to the impacted utilities. We use it often for hiring consultants in relation to, say, a rate case where we might hire, well, one that comes front of mind is we needed expertise on performance-based rate making in the relation to two recent rate cases for Liberty Utilities and Eversource. And so we hired consultants to help us do that. We did not have to go to the Finance Committee, but we did have to go to Governor and Council to get those contracts approved. So we would see that we would be able to do that type of work within our existing statutory authorities.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you both.
Thank you.
Mike Licata. Good morning and welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Michael Licata, representing Eversource Energy. Appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. We do have some concerns with the proposed legislation, and certainly we came here today to learn a little bit more about the sponsor's intent and the driving force behind the bill today. And so it's been helpful to hear from NextEra as well as Chairman Avard about their goals for this. The original intent of this section of law in this RFP program was to incent the development of new resources, not the preservation of existing resources. In our experience in other jurisdictions, I think as the Department of Energy noted, there's really two reasons why states have directed utilities to enter into PPAs with existing resources. One is the preservation of those resources if they're at risk of retirement and the state is looking to preserve economic activity, jobs at the generator, and they're willing to have the utilities enter into these long-term contracts to preserve those jobs. And that is a criteria that is considered both by the legislator and by regulators when approving those contracts. The other reason, by and large, is to advance public policy goals, usually clean energy goals, decarbonization goals, the development of renewable energy, or carbon-free emissions. So again, trying to come here and learn a little bit about why the state is interested in pursuing this program, expanding it to existing resources is helpful. We do have specific concerns around the removal of the 2 million megawatt hour cap. And our concern centered there is that ultimately there can be a negative financial impact on electric utilities for these purchase power agreements, even with cost recovery. Essentially, what is being undertaken if a utility decides to move forward with one of these PPAs is that the generator is leveraging the utility's balance sheet in order to get a revenue stream. And that's capital that the utility has tied up in these purchase power agreements that they can't deploy elsewhere and earn on. And that can have a negative impact on the utility's bottom line. It can have a negative impact on the utility's credit rating if there isn't commensurate remuneration to make the utility whole for essentially tying up the balance sheet. Those are just initial thoughts. I understand there may be additional refinements and changes that the NextEra is seeking. Again, we're here to learn more, but we do have some concerns with the underlying bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mike, just to kind of repeat the question I heard earlier, like concerns about, what other New England states might do in terms of their long-term contracts and whether or not that could potentially hamper New Hampshire's ability to compete in those markets. I mean, just the example that I noted is if Massachusetts, et cetera, were to contract more of Seabrook, where we're getting 50% of ours, what, you know, if we can't have a capacity to compete for that power, we are then more likely to be dependent on gas-generated power. Isn't that just the case of where your supply would come from?
So I think it's important to consider how these agreements are structured.
Yep.
And how the electricity is used. So in the case of the New Hampshire law, the utility actually doesn't use the electricity to serve customers. The utility purchases the electricity at a fixed cost over a fixed term, presumably fixed cost. Obviously, that would be dependent on the structure of the agreement, and then resells that power into the market that all customers in New England have access to. So the revenues or proceeds of those sales go to offset the cost of the fixed price contract. So you're creating a revenue stream for the generator, but the default service customers of the utility aren't actually being served off of that contract. And if there are, if the contract exceeds the market price, all customers are charged for that. If the contract is below the market price, all customers receive the benefit of that through a non-bypassable charge. So that is the typical way that these are structured, even in other states. So I think the concern that other states would be buying this electricity and New Hampshire wouldn't have access to it because of the way that it's structured, where you're entering into a contract, but then reselling into the market and customers are receiving the revenues from that, sort of mitigates that concern. Again, it's the intent of these PPAs really are to incent an activity, incent the generator to either a new source of generation. So your, again, the term of 20 years is in there because that's the typical financing term that a new generator needs to access, or you're really trying to preserve an existing generator for whatever reason, because you want to make sure those clean energy attributes remain, or that generator is at risk of retirement.
So if I may follow up.
Sure.
Wouldn't it be fair to say then that given the, quite large need for new power supply over the next 10 years, and having, now that we have foreclosed the major potential new sources of that, that is likely to put more pressure on the existing facilities?
I think that's absolutely a fair statement.
Thank you.
Senator Roosevelt.
Thank you. Normally, I would ask this question in finance, but the fiscal note says this bill has no fiscal impact on state, county, and local expenditures or revenues. So would it be okay if I asked Mike a question?
Sure.
On this? If, in fact, these long-term power purchase agreements did save money, why wouldn't that have a beneficial effect on what the state, the counties, and the cities and towns paid for electricity? Why would there be no fiscal impact?
So I can't speak to why there is or is not a fiscal note, but what I can say is if these contracts resulted in savings to customers, then yes, the state, local, county would receive the benefits of that. However, the flip side of that coin is, as you pointed out, Senator, everybody's big crystal ball, right? Exactly. If they resulted in increased costs, then, again, that would be an increased cost to all of those customers.
Further questions? All right, Mike, thank
Thank
you
you.
for your testimony. Anybody else that would like to testify on Senate Bill 112? All right, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing. We will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 228, and I will recognize Senator Waters to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 228 relative to the limitations on community customer community customer generators. This bill comes as an attempt to make some adjustments to the size of projects and then who can undertake them in order to attract more investment into this area. And it results from a lot of conversations of what our experience has been with the community solar projects and the investment that has or has not been made in the state. So throughout, there's a lot of language here, but essentially these are two issues that we've talked about a lot before. What is the appropriate number of megawatts to allow for these projects, and then who can undertake them under what circumstances? You'll see in the bill the question of the size of the solar arrays for low moderate income community solar projects is being increased. You'll see there's some more flexibility for a group net metering members to sign agreements with multiple group hosts, and then also the perennial question we've visited and had some expansion from under Senator Avard's bill and attempts by Senator Lang last year, and again this year as well, to expand the definition of political subdivision to include other entities. We're going to have more discussion from folks who are involved in this area to follow, but you can see the changes that I note on page 1 with the striking out there. There may be some question of whether that is actually appropriate to strike out. And I'd say there's some issues that arose from my conversations with Josh Elliott on this bill a few weeks ago that are still unresolved, and I think we're going to need to make a couple of changes, so I'm going to point them out as I go through. Then on page 2, you'll see where the changes are made from 100 kilowatts up to 500 kilowatts. There was some concern from Josh Elliott whether we have a kind of a bifurcation between small and large projects and whether this muddies the way in which these are regulated between small and large. But I just want to point out that this seems to be a level that would attract more investment. You'll see that change continuing on to page 3, and then the result of changing those numbers as you get down to the bottom of page 3, going up to 3 megawatts there. On page 4, there are a couple of issues that I think are going to be discussed more particularly, particularly on line 4 on page 4. Here, who gets to qualify for this? You'll see the change from households to homeowners. I think that was an error, but we'll hear more about it because it might actually cut out a lot of low-income folks who are supposed to be part of this program because they may not own their home. And then down at the bottom here, there's going to be considerable discussion around whether or not, if we want to include the nonprofit educational institutions, whether this bill does it the right way because of that earlier strikeout, which, maybe how these work together will have to be worked out. So in a way, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to present this in such a tentative way, but I thought that after my conversation with Josh Elliott, and I know that Chris Elms is here to follow up on some of these, and then some thoughts from Lindsay Burgoyne, that maybe we should have the hearing, hear where we're at with it from all the parties interested, and then see the ways they might move forward. So I'd kind of like to defer that discussion to the other folks who are going to testify.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll bring
Thank
up let's see, Josh, Chris, did you want to testify on this one?
So Matt from our department.
Oh, Matt's going to. I'm sorry. Okay, Matt, why don't you come on up?
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Matt Young. I'm an attorney at the New Hampshire Department of Energy. As Senator Waters just mentioned, Josh Elliott that was working on this bill. He's out on extended leave, so I will do my best to fill his shoes here today. The Department of Energy is neutral on Senate Bill 228. We do have some concerns, again, as Senator Waters mentioned. I will do my best to sort of try to stay, I guess, chronologically in the bill. So we will start with the language struck in the first section of the bill, removing, I guess, this qualification or limitation on community solar projects. The department believes that would be administratively burdensome for the utilities and lead to increased costs for ratepayers. In a similar vein, that would also lead to complications in energy usage accounting for the department. And maybe taking a step back at sort of the 30,000-foot view, these changes, in a way, I guess, for lack of a better term, upend the group host designation and the intent of that legislation when it was originally passed. I believe it was the intent to have the group hosts be the owners of the renewable energy facilities rather than the members. So making this change would obviously allow a customer generator to be members, which is a bit of a departure. And in doing so, other concerns arise, one of which being that a scenario could exist where a customer generator member could get paid both as a member and see the benefit, but then also participate in the traditional net metering tariffs, which could just raise some concerns with, I guess you could sort of generally refer to that as double dipping. Moving to section 4 of this bill, I'll just highlight that the changes made in this section, so this provision of the statute pertains to what is commonly referred to as net metering 1.0, and those provisions are not available for new generating customer generators. The department actually is involved in Senate Bill 108, which largely, it amends this section and largely removes the language in paragraph 1 and 1A. Just believe that now that with the department developing a new set of 900 rules, net metering 2.0, these sections of law are largely moot. So I would just, I guess, point the committee to that bill in considering this legislation moving forward. Let's see. Senator Waters did mention, I'll just jump to section 7, page 4, the language of page 4 and line 4, actually. This, I believe it was Senate Bill 388 from last session, made pretty much the opposite of the changes that are made in this legislation outside of the capacity rating of 6 to 18. And I'll highlight the concerns that Senator Waters addressed in striking households to homeowners. There is a concern that if it is changed back to homeowners, that would exclude renters from being able to participate in this legislation, or I'm sorry, in that program. And then finally, I think, as Senator Waters mentioned, the language that was struck there in section 8 for the district or entities created for a special purpose. The department is aware of several entities, and I believe it would be things such as water districts and maybe public housing facilities that would not be able to participate if that language was struck. So that would be something that we'd be, I'm willing to work with the committee on. Just look through. So those are just several of the concerns the department had with this legislation. That being said, I'd be happy to work with Senator Waters and the committee and the legislature to find a path forward. With that, happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Questions from the committee? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. In section 6, the total peak generating capacity of up to and including 3 megawatts. What is that number? I mean, why is that number the right number?
So I can't speak to why necessarily why the 3 megawatts would be the right number. That number is capped at 1 megawatt right now by it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's 362A 1A, section 1A, paragraph 2B. I'm not sure I'd be able to comment on why 3 megawatts would be the right number, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Matt. Next, we'll bring up Lindsay Burgoyne. Good morning, welcome.
Say good afternoon.
Hit your button, turn the mic on there. There you go.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Lindsay Burgoyne, Director of Policy and Government Affairs for Revision Energy. As a reminder, we're a clean energy construction company located in Brentwood with offices in Enfield and employ about 100 Granite Staters. Thank you for the consideration of SB 228. We believe this legislation presents reasonable and incremental changes to net metering that will foster self-generation at a time when Granite Staters need more reliable generation. There are multiple provisions in the bill that will increase access of net metering to low to moderate income residents, as well as public entities and small customer generators. I was going to walk through a few sections of the bill. I will not read my full testimony to you all, but I'll just talk about a few key issues that we really support seeing resolved. Largely, the changes in Section 1 institute the allowance of a current customer generator to also to participate in net metering. That is currently prohibited, and essentially this change would open up opportunities for residents or for businesses, entities that participate in community solar. They'd be able to do that even though they have on-site generation. And we think this is really critical because it allows early adopters of solar in our state to be able to offset additional load. And essentially right now those customers are penalized. Maybe they put in a solar array 20 years ago, 10 years ago, load has changed, they've installed heat pumps, and we feel like they should be able to generate, the additional load. On-site generation is treated as a load reducer, and you can only subscribe to a community solar project or to a group host to cover additional load. So we would respectfully disagree with the department's argument there about, opening up concerns about having generation on-site and off-site. In terms of Section 2, the group net metering agreements, this essentially ensures that Granite Staters can sign a net metering agreement with more than one group host. Kind of goes to similar arguments of what was just mentioned, enabling folks to participate in more than one project. There's no statute to the contrary, but currently department rules limit being able to participate and have multiple agreements if you have on-bill crediting. And again, we think this is important, and we already have protections in place that you can only offset energy you consume. And we also already have systems in place to account for energy used and assign that to offsite projects. Section 4 and 5 go into net metering. These are changes we strongly support and essentially could increase the amount of Granite Staters that could benefit from the current small customer generator rules. We think that New Hampshire's net metering law works very well for homeowners and organizations to install solar on small roofs, but the moment you cross an arbitrary line from small to large as a customer generator, you lose significant value. And there are two reasons why that happens. One is a change in credits on the transmission and distribution side, and another is a way that the net metering value is treated in terms of monthly netting or instantaneous net metering. I'm not going to get into detail here today. My testimony covers why that is. I would just say perhaps this was appropriate at the time to set, such rates and such designations of the size of projects with in the absence of empirical evidence, but now with the department's value of distributed energy resources report showcasing no unjust or unreasonable cost shifting, we think it's appropriate and time to make some incremental change to enable more Granite Staters to reduce energy burden and therefore change the small customer generator definition to generation up to 500 kilowatts. And essentially, we think it's unfair to treat projects that are, say, 150 kilowatts in the same way that we treat a 3 megawatt municipal project. The reality is these two different size of projects are cited and financially very different. A 150 kilowatt project is most likely roof mounted. These are projects that are on fire stations, YMCAs, small businesses. They're smaller on-site solar projects benefiting the community, and we think those projects should be encouraged. Section 6 talks about the electric assistance program. Again, we think this makes thoughtful incremental change to grow the state's pioneering program, which encourages generation to serve low to moderate income residents. But I would also echo the note that I think there needs to be a change made, an amendment here, given the referral to providing credits to low to moderate income households. The bill changes that to homeowners. As we discussed, the reality is due to many financial and social barriers, there are not many low-income homeowners, and we believe we want to make sure this program is as beneficial as possible. So we're happy to work with sponsors on an amendment. And lastly, in Section 7, the definitions of municipal host, we very much appreciate the goal of ensuring clarity in the definition of municipal host, something that's been discussed a lot amongst my colleagues and those of us working in this space. And we appreciate the express inclusion of nonprofit educational institutions, but we would point out that the removal of any district or entity created for a special purpose is concerning and potentially contrary to previous legislative intent, and largely concerned that would remove entities, including public housing authorities that are currently included in that definition. So again, happy to work on recommendations for amended language, and really appreciate the opportunity to testify and to be here today, and the focus you all are taking on energy fairness in the state. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Lindsay. And I think some good just happening in the drafting of this, and I hope that we can meet pretty soon with Matt and just see what we can do, or if we can do anything on this. I wondered if you might address the question that was raised about potential double dipping in section 1 that Matt raised, and you have some thoughts about that?
Sure. Yeah, happy to speak to that. So essentially, when you have small on-site generation, that's reducing actual kilowatt hours that are recorded. And so that power is treated as a load reducer. It's essentially the same as if you were to install LED lights or anything in terms of using less energy. And then there's an amount, a total amount remaining that you are not utilizing on site that is kind of the remaining load. And when you sign up for a group host project, you can only subscribe to the remaining load. You can't double dip. You can't add more energy to that and be able to generate more than you can actually consume. Those protections already exist in place in law.
So, if I may, if there is a question about that one, there might be some language that could be added to ensure that fear was not.
I think you could add language and reference the rules that are there, but I would respectfully disagree that that's a concern.
And I know things are on the fly, but have you seen the amendment to 108 that changes the sections?
I have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't released that yet.
Yeah, all right, well, that's why I won't talk about it, but I'm not sure that it makes a lot of difference, this bill, but we'll talk about that too.
Sure.
That's all I have. I do have another question for Matt after Lindsay's questions.
All right. Further questions from the committee?
Thank you.
All right, seeing none. Did you want me to bring Matt back for one
If
question?
you wouldn't mind.
Matt, would you come back and answer one question before I continue on? Thank you.
Thank you
again.
so much. You heard Lindsay mention the fact about the 900 rules, and I didn't know if you wanted to make any comment on that. That there wasn't in statute.
That the 900 rules
Yeah.
aren't in statute?
Well, no, the 900 rules say you cannot sign multiple agreements and participate in on-bill crediting. Whereas that's not in statute, that there's that prohibition.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can speak to that fully competently. My understanding was that that scenario would apply if the customer generator was a group host, but if they're a member and then also just separately net metering, that there might be a difference there that would need to be fleshed out.
Okay, thank you. And do you mind if I ask this too? Since we're talking about community solar, does the department have access again to the community solar grant, the 43 million? I heard some states as of yesterday got that access back. Do you know where we are?
I do not.
Senator, thank you for the question. Chris Elms, Deputy Commissioner. At this time, we're still, in working on communication with our federal partners, and we will keep this committee and others updated as we learn more.
Thank you. Just thought I'd ask, because I did see some other states, the spigot was turned back on, so I didn't know if it happened to us yet.
We will be sure to keep you updated.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Griffin Roberge. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning, members of the committee. Griffin Roberge with Eversource Energy, here to just testify on Senate Bill 228. Specifically, my comments are focused on sections 1 and 2 of the bill. I think DOE kind of mentioned that utilities might have some implementation concerns, and we certainly wanted to share those with the committee. So the language in section 1, as it's intended, it looks like looks to allow into group net metering arrangements those customers who may be already customer generators themselves and under the net metering program. We do envision this presenting administrative and billing challenges for Eversource. Our current billing systems are not able to adequately track both credits from a customer's own exports from their own net metering system and any proceeds that they may have received from a group host. Members who participate under the net metering program have variable loads and exports throughout the year, which can impact the broader load of group host net metering arrangements. So this adds an enormous amount of complexity when it comes to tracking the load of the various customers. Our billing process is not automatically set up to capture all this information. It is an entirely manual process with staff that would have to work off of spreadsheets, taking data out of the billing system, closely tracking customer load, and manually applying credits to customer bills. So this will likely increase our staffing costs, which are, again, borne by our ratepayers. And then again, with any type of increase in a manual process, there is a greater likelihood of potential human error as well. So certainly want to add that voice to the conversation here. Similarly on section 2, again, more complexity here as you allow customers who wish to join several different group net metering arrangements. Again, we'd have to manually vet each group, manually vet each member of that arrangement. Track which group host arrangements that they are part of. Again, this is a very complex undertaking, and I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions? Senator Waters.
I don't even want to contemplate manual operations. I guess I don't even want to think about that. That's in fact the way you're doing it.
Yes.
But I will ask this. do you think it's possible to develop a system where the host or the generator was the entity that would be required to do that tracking and record keeping?
Sure, and thank you for the question. So I believe that's pretty much done right now with a kind of self-certification process. But again, that's taking folks at their word and, double checking all of the information again through a very intense manual process that utilities kind of have that access to that data. That again will likely bring about some increased costs to kind of facilitate this type of mechanism here as outlined in the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Testimony. Malcolm, sorry, I can't quite get the last name. Bliss, all right. That's all right, no worries. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
Turn your mic on, please. Just hit the button there.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Malcolm Bliss, Senior Director at Kearsarge Energy with office in Hudson, New Hampshire, and headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts. Honored to serve the residents, the people, and the government of New Hampshire. I'm here this morning to speak in support of the proposed SB 228, especially the relief it offers for low and moderate income residents of the state. The current program does offer initial but modest relief to those most needy in the state. The increase of relief intended by SB 228 is much needed. It's much needed by low-income families, such as families living at Lloyd Hills Apartments in Bethlehem. It offers relief to veterans, such as veterans living at Buckingham Place in Nashua, and offers relief to those with developmental disabilities, such as those living at Easter Seals facilities like the facility in Champagne Place in Rochester. The relief provided by the current program is less than needed. Absent SB 228, low-income families, veterans, and people with disabilities will be excluded from sharing the development of new energy resources. But with SB 228, the residents will receive the much-needed relief and be able to participate and share with others. That's very brief. Thank you for your time and support of SB 228, and especially provisions that provide that relief to the low-income families, veterans, and people with disabilities. With your support, I look forward to the future of everybody sharing in development of new energy resources across the state. Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions?
Yeah. Thanks for coming to testify. And you referenced, some projects around the state. And is it the case that they would benefit from this because they already have the projects in place, and this would let them offload power that might be in excess of what they're using, or exactly how would they affect those entities?
I think there's two ways in which this enables the relief to flow, those benefits to flow. One is for projects that are already under development, those are largely spoken for. I think there's a shortage of this type of energy. But with the increase in cap for the projects from 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts, that will open up a greater future for this relief to be delivered.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jack?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jack Ruderman. I serve as the Energy and Legislative Affairs Advisor for New Hampshire Housing. New Hampshire Housing is a self-supporting corporation, public corporation, and our mission is to promote, support, and finance housing solutions for the people of New Hampshire. We are here today in support of SB 228, primarily for three reasons, all of which pertain to Section 6 of the bill, which is the section that raises the net metering cap from 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts. We are, along with the New Hampshire Department of Energy and the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, recipients of the EPA Solar for All grant that was awarded to the state of New Hampshire. The amount of that grant is $43.5 million. Of that, we, New Hampshire Housing, will receive a subaward of $23 million. And our plans for those funds are to, one, help provide incentives for the installation of on-site solar at multifamily buildings serving low-income residents. But secondly, we're looking to create up to 5 1-megawatt community solar installations that would be group net metered to low-income residents of buildings that we finance throughout the state, mainly through the federal low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC. And one of the things we've heard when we talk to solar developers is, yes, we can do 1 megawatt, but if we could do 5 megawatts or 4 megawatts or 3 megawatts, it's a much better value. The economics just work better, economies of scale. This bill could have a direct impact on our plans to develop these community solar projects around the state. So in terms of the reasons why we support the bill, first and foremost is it would allow low-income residents to access the bill savings enabled by community-scale solar installations of up to 3 megawatts rather than the current 1 megawatt. Currently, that 1 megawatt is somewhat of an arbitrary limit, and it means that low-income residents see less savings. Secondly, it's already the case that low-income residents of public housing can be off-takers for projects up to 5 megawatts in scale as part of municipal groups. This would allow other types of low-income housing to receive similar treatment. This includes low-income housing tax credit properties, which are overwhelmingly the new affordable housing properties that are being built. And finally, this bill would allow the incoming Solar for All funding to go further, resulting in more savings for low-income people. Alternatively, if the Solar for All program funds remain frozen, which we hope they will not be, this bill still would improve the likelihood that a low-income community solar industry could at least start to take root in New Hampshire, even without federal subsidies, again, due to the economies of scale that would be realized by larger community solar arrays. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm asking so many questions.
I think this is great. You're going to be the chairman someday.
3 seems arbitrary to me, so I'm wondering, because as I read section 6, it seems like the first, and I'm probably wrong here, but it seems like the first part of it applies to just maybe some neighbors getting together and sharing the solar array. But the second part, starting really on lines 2031 and continuing to the end of that paragraph, is about public housing projects or authorities. Should there be a higher cap on a larger housing authority
Sure.
than a group of neighbors?
Yep. We certainly wouldn't be opposed to a larger cap. We were not part of the process of drafting the bill, so I would defer to the senators who put the bill together. But conceptually, yes, that makes sense to us.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chad Whitaker. I'm a lifelong New Hampshire resident, graduate from the Massachusetts School of Law, and I have built my career over the last 5 years helping public housing authorities procure HUD-compliant community solar agreements. I actually run the RFPs on behalf of the housing authorities. My largest client happens to be the city of Boston. I also represent the Albany, the Buffalo, and the Niagara Falls housing authorities in New York, almost every single housing authority in the state of Maine, and a good portion of them down in Massachusetts. I am in support of this bill, but there were a few items that I had noticed that I thought may cause some unintended consequences, and I just wanted to walk through this to see if it could be of any kind of assistance. The first portion of it that really stuck out to me was Section 8 in the definitions, removing the district or entity created for a special purpose, administered or funded by any of the above named governmental units. That would directly eliminate public housing authorities from being able to participate under the municipal host. I did work last year with the Department of Energy confirming that housing authorities did qualify as municipal hosts, so seeing this regression, I think would have the unintended consequences of eliminating a lot of housing authorities from being able to participate with the 5 megawatt projects. And as we all know, the majority of low to moderate income is coming from Section 9 public housing. Going back to Section 6, when it comes to the definitions, I agree. I think the 3 megawatts is an arbitrary limit. I would think it would make sense to have the 3 megawatt limit actually match the municipal host limit. Again, that would tie into the fact, though, that the Department of Energy has already concluded that public housing authorities do qualify under the municipal host definition as it was previously written. When it comes to the term directly benefit, I've seen this cause some issues in some other states, and I'm not sure if it was the intent of the committee to have the words directly benefit be there for a purpose, but other states have used the term financial benefit. And the Category 4 projects and Category 3 projects, so the investment tax credit at the federal level, do actually draw a distinction between the terms direct benefit and financial benefit. The difference is that when it comes to Section 9 public housing, the majority of housing authorities are paying for the electricity on behalf of their tenants. If you have the word direct benefit in there, that is often interpreted as saying that the tenant has to have the electric bill in their own name, meaning that the housing authority would not be able to enroll any of the properties that they're actually paying the electric bills for. Whereas financial benefit is actually considered, is looked at differently. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development released a memo, I believe it was in August of last year, talking about how housing authorities are able to extend the financial benefit of community solar onto their tenants who live in master metered buildings or buildings that have sub-meters that are still paid for by the housing authority. So unless the intent is to exclude public housing authority paid meters from the definition of low to moderate income, I think changing direct benefit to financial benefit would be worthwhile.
What line is that?
What was that?
What line is that?
That is line 27 and 29.
On page?
On page 3.
Sorry for interrupting.
No problem. Yeah, lines 27, and then again, it's mentioned in 29, it says directly benefit. And as I said, we've seen 2 different definitions used by the IRS and the Treasury in regards to the investment tax credit, and they do draw a distinction between those 2 terms.
Oh, you're on page 3. I thought you said page 2.
No, I did. I corrected myself. I apologize.
Oh.
I said 2 at first.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The last item would be the very end of that section on line 34, non-residential end-use customers. Again, my question would be, are public housing authorities or low to moderate income housing tax credit properties considered resident or non-residential end-use customers? Technically, they're corporations or nonprofits. If they're considered non-residential end-use customers, then I don't have an issue with that. However, if this is interpreted as a 15% of a non-residential end-use customer, if they don't, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. essentially my concern here is that master metered buildings consume usually a megawatt or more in a lot of our circumstances. If we're putting a cap on 15% of the project load must go to non-residential end-use customers, but we don't clearly define whether or not that includes public housing authorities and low-income tax credit properties, you're going to run into a scenario where you're going to have, for example, the Manchester Housing Authority is going to have meters that consume a megawatt or more, and those meters are not going to be able to participate into the program, or if they do participate, they're not going to be able to receive a bill credit discount on the entirety of their usage for that section. I think 15% is an arbitrary limit unless we directly conclude that housing authorities meters, regardless of their rate class, and same with low-income housing tax credit meters, are included in the definition of non-residential end-use customer.
Other than that, you like the bill?
Oh, I like the bill, yeah.
All right.
As I said, I do this across the country. I work with housing authorities in every state, and these are some issues that I've been seeing popping up in several other states.
Okay.
And considering that I've been working in New Hampshire since 2017, trying to see a robust low to moderate income community solar program start, I wanted to see if I could come and weigh in a little bit. So I'm open to any questions.
Questions from the committee?
Thank you so much for pointing these things out.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it all?
Yep.
I bet you do.
More or less.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
right, thank you.
Sam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Sam Evans-Brown, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. So I'm passing around written testimony. I thought it might just be helpful to lay out all of the incremental steps that we've taken over the last 5 years or so to try to create a community solar market in the state of New Hampshire. And what I think I would say is that we're almost there, like we've almost got it. At this point, if you look at Eversource's public interconnection queue, there's over 500 megawatts of 1 to 5 megawatt solar arrays that are trying to get built right now. The question that I think we should be asking ourselves today is who is going to benefit from those projects? Under New Hampshire's existing statute, right now, municipalities are essentially the sole entity. Municipalities, counties, public entities are the sole entity that can benefit from those 1 to 5 megawatt projects. And unless this piece of legislation or a similar piece of legislation that increases the cap for these low-income community solar projects passes, low-income folks simply are not going to be able to take part in those projects. They'll be capped at 1 megawatt arbitrarily, as they have been for quite a while. Senator Rosenwald, you asked the question multiple times, why 3 megawatts? I would agree that that's a fairly arbitrary restriction. I'm not convinced, though, that it needs to be much higher. Typically what happens with community solar developers is they find they're looking for good sites. And what is a good site for a solar array takes a lot of different things. The most important piece is there a spot to interconnect to the grid? After that, they have to ask themselves, are there slopes? Are there wetlands? Can we actually build the array? And often what happens is they find a good grid interconnection point, and then they go out and they check out the site in person, and they find, the GIS file had a bunch of wetlands that weren't identified, and suddenly they have to shrink the array so that they minimize the environmental impact. And so there are going to be, of these 5 megawatt projects that are floating around in the interconnection queue, a bunch of them are going to get shrunk down, and those projects will be looking for off-takers. They'll be looking for customers. So I think the 3 megawatt limit that's in the bill is somewhat arbitrary, but I think workable. If the committee wanted to bump it all the way to 5, as we have deemed reasonable for municipalities, I think that would also be a reasonable approach. That 5 megawatts, as we've discussed at this committee, is the cutoff between federal and state jurisdiction in a number of meaningful contexts. I will say I share the concerns of a bunch of folks about the various typos that seem to be inadvertent. I was really glad to hear that most of those seem to be inadvertent, and would be happy to work with the committee on trying to get this bill into shape. The one last thing I'd say, I will say I'm a little perplexed by the double dipping conversation. Having filled out a group host application, the answer to this seems fairly straightforward. If you're going to take part in some sort of community solar array, you're capped in terms of how much of your consumption can be credited. And so that is the limit against double dipping. You can't take credit for more than what you consume, period. And that should I think put the double dipping question to bed. We already are allowing municipal host members to sign up as off-takers to multiple different projects. So I don't see it as a bridge too far to expand that same right to other types of customers. I will say I understand Eversource's concerns about their billing software. As we have seen with other utilities, making sudden sweeping changes in how we bill for electricity can lead to unintended consequences. So I think we should work with Eversource really closely to make sure that whatever we do is within their capabilities. But I think the double dipping question has somehow taken root in ways that I simply don't understand. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Griffin, you still here? Way in the back. It's like being in church, right?
Are you inspiring?
No. I just want to hear from you.
Yes, sir.
I was out of the room, but as far as the double dipping thing, can we work with you on this?
Sure. So I didn't make any reference to double dipping in my testimony or anything. I think our concern at Eversource is certainly just want to emphasize that in terms of billing, in terms of accounting for these expansions and group host net metering, that is a very intense and complex manual process for us and our staff, and we'll likely need additional resources. And just for the committee's education, those additional costs will be borne by ratepayers. So, just want to share those thoughts with the committee.
All right, and you're definitely willing to work with Senator Waters on this piece of legislation, and us, obviously. All right, thank you. Unless you have something you might have thought of, no, then we all set.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I saw a hand up. Come on in. Water's warm.
Thank you, Senator. I had a paper cut for that over the testimony, so I didn't get the slide up.
Oh.
But that's sterile.
Are you okay?
I am.
All right.
There's a great nurse. I'm Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group, and I briefly wanted to hand in some written testimony from an array of customers who support 228 and outline a little bit of why they are, to give you a flavor of who benefits from this. First of all is Stonyfield Organic, which is a food manufacturing facility in Londonderry that employs 450 people. They want to expand their self-generation opportunities, but the footprint is not large enough. In part is because if those you're familiar with their location, they're very near the airport. In industrial zone, it's hard to acquire more property to expand the facility. So one of the provisions in this bill would allow for those self-generators who are in tight parcels to be able to find an off-site location for their expansion of their solar. The other testimony that I'm handing in includes the Nashua YMCA. Coincidental that their two senators are here. In addition to that, the Keene Housing Authority and Progenics, which is a marketing company in Newmarket, New Hampshire. They all support the bill, but those last three customers, I want to draw your attention to Section 5 of the bill, which deals with trying to close the donut hole for customers who are not small enough to benefit and be treated as a residential customer and not big enough to be a manufacturing customer. So they're not really small and they're not really large. And so they can't take full advantage of the value of the net metering credit, which is available. This seeks to close that loophole, and they are not alone. If you think about a YMCA, a housing authority, in a small business, there are thousands of them around New Hampshire that fall into this problem of not fitting the proper definition of small or large. So I'm passing out that testimony. I'm happy to work on behalf of these customers and others with the committee and the DOE to clean this bill up and get it to the floor.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. And anybody else want to talk? Get a second chance, bite at the apple. Going once, going twice. We'll close the hearing. 228. And we'll hear from the prime sponsor of our next bill. Actually, it's not here yet. Thank you. Senator Waters, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 230, allowing microgrids that are in the public interest. Now, I know that we have, under previous legislation, established some study of microgrids, but I thought in light of the movement in this area, and particularly the example of our neighboring state of Maine, which has passed legislation similar to this a few years ago, and it's having a beneficial effect, that I thought it would be useful to bring forward legislation at this time. Before I go into the details of the bill, I just want to give the larger picture of it. What it essentially does is to say that here's a definition of a microgrid and the capacity to, for a customer generator to send power across their property line, potentially municipal lines if they wanted to help power critical infrastructure like a hospital, or if they had another manufacturing facility that wasn't exactly contiguous, and they would have some rights therefore to create a microgrid and to construct across property or town lines. To do so with the appropriate safeguards on zoning, on guarantees of reliability, and an important sign-off from the utility that it would not duplicate or conflict with any utility transmission. I will say that there are some similarities to this with a bill that Representative Vose has in the House for customer generators, and I think the supplement to his bill in this is that whereas his envisions all the power being utilized on site, this bill says you could have your manufacturing site here and your generating site here, or generating site here and 2 or 3 places that might benefit from the power. The other, I think, important thing that the bill does is it takes into account small modular reactors. Maine's bill and a lot of the bills that have been set up in this area are envisioning new renewables, mostly solar. And I say there are 3 projects that are approved so far for microgrids, relatively small. In Maine, 2 for the Penobscot Indian Nation because they have real reliability issues about getting their power out to the island and to other lands, but also over the whole town of Eastport, the capacity there to create a microgrid. But what they're doing is doing batteries and solar. It seemed to me that we needed to also include small modular reactors in this, because they may well, whether it's for a data center or whether it's for reliability purposes, that they are something that are certainly of great interest in it. And so what the bill does is says that would also count as a clean energy resource to be used. And then also, I think that the definition here gives the right size definition for it that is based on the Federal Nuclear Laboratory's definition of 300 megawatts. That is what GE has just announced that is going into construction on as a modular size. The Google reactors are 345. That's very particular to what Google wants to do. There are a number of companies that are developing ones at 80 megawatt level, and then there's some very small modular ones as well. So that's the big picture here. It does 2 things. It says that if you meet this definition of microgrid, then the PUC will authorize it under the conditions that are outlined for the PUC, and then it also sets up the criteria by which the PUC will make that determination, including the energy sources, and then a list of priorities, including critical infrastructure and so forth. So that said, Mr. Chairman, there's some language here that says that this does not change existing statutes defining whether something is transmission or distribution utility, and it clarifies that somebody who establishes a microgrid is not becoming a utility. The core here is in the definition, starting on line 11 on page 1, as to what a microgrid is as a localized grid with interconnected loads and the uses of that power. And then you'll see the change that I mentioned on about small modular nuclears is that lines 18 to 20, and it refers back up to lines 7 and 8 where that definition of small modular reactor is given. And let me just emphasize that no matter what we think about this bill in terms of the advisability of microgrids, we really need to get this definition in statute about the small modular. Most of our statute on nuclear dates back to 1955 and 1957. And I think that regardless of what we do, we better get this definition here so investors that are looking at New Hampshire know that we have some regulatory framework for it. So starting at the bottom of page 1, you get the guardrails that I talked about. So, you know, who is it who constructs, maintains, or operates it, and what they can do. And then starting on page 2, the requirements they must meet in terms of contractors, values, and the notification to the transmission distribution utility, and then crucially on lines 14, starting there on page 2, the objection that a utility can bring to a proposal. And then on line 20 is the directions to the Public Utilities Commission that if these requirements are met, then they are authorized to approve a petition to construct and operate a new microgrid. Do note that there are 2 kind of cuts of the size of these projects. For the general renewable energy supplies mentioned, 10 megawatts. But if it's a small modular reactor, then it would be under the up to 300 megawatts that could be powered. So that is a bifurcation there, depending on the power source. Then on the final page, I think that here are the consumer protections to ensure that it does some good things. Is it going to increase resilience and reliability of the electric grid, including energy storage of 4-hour or longer duration? Is it going to have economic development benefits? Is it going to support critical infrastructure? And you'll see here that I've listed including but not limited to hospitals, nursing homes, grocery stores, wastewater treatment, other municipal facilities, public safety facilities, transportation infrastructure, military facilities, and data processing centers, and any other factors the Commission considers necessary to promote the public interest. So I think that's important, particularly around the critical infrastructure. We know that with power outages and other things, you know, there's been a lot of interest in the small modular nuclear, not only from military bases, but from potentially hospitals, municipal complex, and of course data centers as well. And then note, starting on line 20, more consumer protections there. Any increase in cost to the electric transmission distribution system of the state as a result of a microgrid must be fully covered from the person approved under this subsection. It's not being, may not be passed on to other electric rate mayors. And then just some general language starting on line 25 to make sure that the Public Utility Commission has the flexibility to make sure that this is within the public interest. And then there's be some reporting. And I think this is, you know, another reason why I don't think it conflicts necessarily with the ongoing study of microgrids, because let's see if there's an interest. Let's see what kind of proposals come forward, and then we can report on what's happening. And I think that will inform other reporting. I'll address the physical note very briefly, the concerns about, you know, if we suddenly had a lot of these proposals and they were very large, what the capacity might need there to be to examine them. From the example of the main ones so far, they're all relatively small. And so I don't think that we're looking at suddenly an influx of costs here. On the nuclear ones, that's going to be coming out, that's going to be something that evolves over the next few years. But again, I'm just so concerned that New Hampshire signal to investors that we are a potential place to invest because we have some regulation in place that will be rational for you, and you can anticipate the process you might have to go through if you want to start a project here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're going to hear from DOE on this, and we're off to the races.
Possibly, yes. I do have a question, line 28, page 1.
Which page?
Page 1, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just has to do with the transmission distribution. So obviously, Eversource or whoever will not have to maintain those lines at all. Will they be using the same poles? They won't. They'll have to do.
I don't envision that. I mean, it
And
says.
they'll have to assume all costs as far as.
Right.
Right. Is there a limit to how many customers, if you will, that they supply? Up to?
Yeah, how big the grid would be.
Yeah. Is there a limit to how big?
Well, yeah, I mean, thanks for the question, and I think that what amount of the load is going to be consumed on site? If it's a data center, it might be most of it, if not all, or, I mean, it's, a particular business or who has 2 plants or one the town over. But that's why there are the guardrails around the 10 megawatts or the small modular. And in either case, there's the consumer protections here and the ability of the PUC to review each project to see if it's appropriate for public interest.
Did you touch on zoning or anything like that?
Pardon?
Did you touch on zoning at all?
That's included here that it must abide by zoning, yeah.
Questions?
That's on the page 2. There's the list here of the things that must be observed.
Senator Rosenwald. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, like me, you care a lot about words and their meanings. And I'm confused by section 3F, which is including nuclear in the definition of renewable. Because my understanding is that most of it is generated through uranium, and you can't create a new element. So isn't it like saying that day is night?
Thanks for your question on that. I think that what we're in a context now of very much evolving definitions. It might have been, one might have used the term instead non-carbon emitting, and some states are doing that because there are many states that now are considering a renewable source to include nuclear. That is essentially what states to our south have done as a way to account for the ability to include nuclear energy in the portfolio of what are considered to be non-carbon emitting sources. So it's not just wordsmithing, I know that, but I thought that what was easier to do here was to have that addition. Renewable source means source of energy defined that will qualify to receive these credits, whether, and SMRs is defined there. So, it is kind of a statute, how to intervene in statute to include this or that. I understand the kind of concern about whether that term is appropriate, but we did something similar when we did hydrogen legislation last time, when we decided, we included, hydrogen defined as a non-carbon emitting resource, and then had a provision in that bill to include hydrogen that might be produced by excess steam at a nuclear facility. So maybe it's apples and oranges, but I think you see what the intent here is under that rubric to say to understand that as non-carbon emitting sources.
Would you consider changing it to non-carbon emitting?
Thanks for
or
the question.
clean, or
Um,
something that was more, perhaps more.
I'll take another look. I looked at this pretty closely. Part of it has to do with the construction of 374 G11 and how to appropriately intervene without setting the whole apple cart about how that's set up now. I'll take another look.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have Mike.
I think it's still morning. Good morning. Again, Michael Licata, Eversource Energy. Again, appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. We certainly appreciate the sponsors' intent to make progress on incenting the development of microgrids. However, we do have several concerns with the bill as introduced that I'd like to share with you. So the first is, as Senator Waters said, adding the definition of small modular nuclear reactor up to 300 megawatts per unit, and how that interfaces or relates to the further limitations on microgrids that can be developed, a cap of 10 megawatts or 25 megawatts for two, whether the nuclear-powered microgrids are completely separate and distinct from that, and just how that relates. I think the language there is a little unclear and could require some refinement and also further understanding of what the sponsor's intent is. We do have a concern that the bill is constructed allowing third parties to construct these microgrids could result in duplicative infrastructure, which may increase cost and lead to some safety issues. I know the bill sponsor had referenced an opportunity or a reference to public utility objection. However, we feel that language is somewhat unclear about how utilities could provide input to the Public Utilities Commission, what process that the commission would use to evaluate that. Ultimately, if you think about having two sets of poles and wires in public rights of way, and this relates to our next concern, which is that these entities would not have to comply with the requirements of being a public utility, whether that's around safety, emergency response. So, we do testified on a similar bill in the House yesterday, where we do have situations where during storms or emergency situations where we do have wires down, they're energized, the local first responders know who to call. We have the ability to, in many cases, isolate that line, remotely shut it off. Here you would have potentially, a third-party unregulated entity. Whose wires are they? You might have someone trapped in a car. So you can understand some concerns around that, especially giving the ability to operate and construct within public rights of way and not have those same requirements that utilities do. I do have also some concerns around the language on page 3, Roman 4. I certainly understand, or I believe I understand, the sponsor's intent to have a third-party microgrid not result in costs incurred on other customers. However, in considering the utility application of a law like this, where we might determine its lowest cost to address a reliability issue through the construction of a microgrid, battery that can be disconnected, this seems to require that we would have to recover the costs of that investment from the customers who are directly connected to it, as opposed to if it's a reliability investment. Say if we were reconstructing a line, all customers would pay for that under the current construct, as opposed to just the customers who are fed off of that line. And then finally, as the sponsor mentioned, this body did pass HB 558 just last year, which directed the Department of Energy to conduct an investigation or into a microgrid study. That process is underway. Eversource is, I will just say, fully engaged in it. At one of the most recent meetings, I think it might have been the kickoff meeting, we had multiple vice presidents and directors of planning and engineering participating, sharing our experiences in the development of microgrids and best practices. So we do feel that it may be in the best interest to allow that process to conclude, which is supposed to be at the end of this year, and then taking those recommendations and perhaps developing legislation around it next year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Matt?
Good morning again.
Good morning.
For the record, Matt Young, I'm an attorney with the Department of Energy. The department is neutral on SB 230 as introduced. We do have a concern, I guess really in the overarching concern, which was really just discussed by the previous speaker. As you mentioned, HB 558 was passed in last session, 2024. And in this past fall, the department did open a proceeding to investigate the potential benefits, risks, key considerations around developing a framework for electricity microgrids in New Hampshire. The report for that and recommendations coming out of that investigation are due later this year to the legislature in November, which were meant to inform policymakers on issues related to this issue. SB 230, as introduced, does define, describe, and mandate a lot of sort of the same things, issues that are actively being discussed and considered in that investigation. So in order to avoid issues which, again, were just raised by the last speaker, such as redundancy, cost, safety concerns, I think the department would like the committee to consider allowing that investigation to complete before moving forward. Obviously, it is the legislature's prerogative to move forward with this legislation. We'd be happy to work with senators and eventually the House if needed on this legislation. So I guess with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, you did a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have nobody else to speak on this unless somebody wants another bite at the apple. Jody? No? Come on. Just teasing you. No. All right, we're going to close the hearing on this. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to move into exec?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none? Senator Waters, have you looked at this amendment that the department approved?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked with them.
Senator Rosenwald?
I worked with them last week.
Okay.
So I'm glad we're.
That's for SB 110? And if you would, this should be a committee amendment. So would this be considered a replace all? SB 110, the AOT, yeah.
So, I'll say a couple words about it.
Is there a motion to?
Yeah, I'll move 110 up that.
Second. All right, discussion.
And I'll move, what's the, I don't know if I had.
This is going to be a committee amendment.
I move amendment.
Committee amendment?
Yeah.
Second. All right.
So,
Discussion.
just, we had really extensive hearings last week on this and on 109. Lots and lots of issues related to this that were somewhat related. We went back and forth around DES and Fish and Game, the application fees in this bill and in 109, whether there might be some method of funding for Fish and Game. I had considerable talked with Senator Lang afterwards and Fish and Game about some possibilities, and then I talked extensively with DES about both bills. And I think that there are going to be things in the governor's budget, both around department reorganization and around particular environmental regulations. So I think it's really good for us to wait on 109. But I think it's still going to be related in terms of the fee structures. So what I had hoped would happen in this one is kind of where it ended up, that we'd be able to clarify if we're going up, you know, the 150,000. Thank you, Matt Mayberry and other people who've been working on it as well. I think the 150,000 makes some sense from what we heard. If we go to that, I mean, I think that's going to help the developers without getting into too much of the anxiety areas about environmental review. And so then a lot of the rest of the bill kind of right sizes the fee structure based on the new things. You'll see also that it embeds in here a potential structure fee increase. So that we won't have to be coming back to the legislature every single year if these sit around for years after years. And there'll be rules around that. Then something I really argued for inclusion is the very last thing here. A project that would result in a discharge of stormwater within 1/4 mile of the class A surface water or within the water surface water national forest or surface water designated as natural, so on, which are considered that or projects subject to 483B9. I think these are really important guardrails. I heard what Senator McConkey was saying about, you know, the boogeyman now is everywhere is cyanobacteria, and what that might do to property values, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a good guardrail that's added in there, and it should not be qualify for anyway. So I mean, I think that's a good addition too. So sorry to ramble on, but I think this really works.
How do we insert this into the bill? Is it a replace all, or?
I believe so, isn't it?
I think so. Senator.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to the fiscal committee piece, having been on it for, I don't know, 7 terms or something. I think there's a disconnect between saying the fees shall be increased annually by the CPI, and then saying, oh, but the fiscal committee has to approve or deny it. I think we can do one or the other. But personally, I think having 10 people decide on a fee increase is not transparent.
So what would you offer?
Well, I might say that the fiscal committee shall be informed. If we want to annually increase the fee by the CPI, I've never seen something like that. I mean, usually we're like, no fee increases ever. I just think we're setting up an expectation that the fees will go up by a percentage, and then saying, oh, but 10 people can say no. So maybe it's with, a presentation, or LBA could write the language, but those two parts of that paragraph seem to run into conflict for me.
Can the department come up and comment on that? Are you okay with making the?
Let's see what they say.
Yeah.
This is complicated because of the House, I think. So.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. For the record, Phil Trowbridge, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Not really an expert in the question that you're asking. I think we would be interested in what LBA might, or Legislative Services might be able to advise on. I think the idea was we wanted the legislature to have some control over these fee increases. We're putting, CPI is calculated in weird ways. Think of what happened during COVID, where there were very big swings of CPI, and it may not have been appropriate to raise the fees as much as the CPI was calling for. So we thought it was a useful addition and something that'd be more acceptable to stakeholders if there was a check on that, sort of a human in the loop, so to speak, to approve or deny such an increase. Go ahead.
Senator Rosenwald.
In that case, you could say, starting July 1st, 2027, the department shall propose fee increases consistent with the change in consumer price index. I'm trying to think what fees fiscal approves, and it's really two. The ski tickets for Cannon Mountain and the camping fees at Franconia Notch State Park. And it's only 10 of us. And Cannon Mountain and Franconia Notch are state parks, and yet 2 years ago, we hiked the ski ticket price by 30% on the state employees and senior citizens. And it worries me the more we give fiscal responsibility to make decisions. So I think we should go either one way or the other. But I think the way this language is drafted right now, those two things will come into conflict. So either the department should propose and fiscal should approve, or the department or the fees shall be increased and fiscal has to be notified.
Senator Waters.
Yeah, thanks. So Phil, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the ability of staff to handle all the work that it's doing on these. And that led to us to increase the fees a few years ago. And we right-sized some, but we increased fees. Was it 2 years ago?
2019.
Yeah, or a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is that, I understand, understandably, some House members are going to say that nothing can be spent if it doesn't go through a legislative body of some sort, and sometimes they're willing to let fiscal do it.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty strong voice in some members of House Finance. And so I can see why it was done this way. But maybe, would it be impossible for the Department of Financial over the next few years if we just eliminated that? And just said, if you got to come back in 3 or 4 years and say, here's where we're at, then come back in 3 or 4 years. Because I like the concept here, but I agree with my colleague. I just see it's asking for trouble. We're going to get so in the weeds on this that we might lose the bill.
No, that would be acceptable to the department. We were trying to avoid these large jumps in fees, and I think no one likes that. But this is a kind of a new idea for us that we are, and if it's going to cause angst, it's more important. The other elements of the bill are more important.
Yeah. So how would we change this?
Just take it out.
Just take what part out though?
Just that sentence.
Starting July 1st, just cut it.
It ends.
Just at the end, bottom of the page.
Yep.
Strike out the whole bottom.
All that bold to the bottom. No, the whole paragraph?
Yeah, we probably need the rules.
Okay, sorry, yeah, you're right. Increase, requested increase.
Yes, yeah.
So keep that last sentence.
Senator McCarthy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Phil. Couple questions. I'm not as happy with the rewrite as my fellow colleagues sitting here. I'm gonna go backwards. I'm gonna go, the department, on the back page, the department shall adopt rules to establish a permit by notification for projects. I always have a real concern when permit by notifications, when developing rules when that's going to happen and what's done here to appease a piece of legislation. And I appreciate the senator's comment of taking into consideration stormwater. And, but a quarter mile, if I remember right, it's 1,320 feet. And this senator was not talking about something over 1,000 feet away. He was talking about something that was just beyond the limits, excuse me, of shoreland regulations, 250, 300 feet. I find I'm not acceptable with that. I'm very appreciative of the effort. I'm just not acceptable to that. And I guess my other comment comes on the raising of fees. I can see the benefit. I'll start with the raising of fees. So we go from looks like section 2, page 1. We go from a fee which was $3,125 for 150,000 square feet to a $5,000 fee. Next line down, 200,000 square feet shall be 6,250. And then it was raising the additional fee of, which used to be $1,250, if I read this right, adds another $1,000 onto that. I will say to the chairman, I'm not comfortable with this bill today. I would like some time, and I would like to see some reworking, especially of the back page. Now, to the department's position on having to keep coming back and not keeping up with inflation. We've talked about that a long time, and I'm starting to understand it and starting to come to a course of agreement. But I understand my fellow colleagues on that. I guess I don't have a question unless you have an answer in there for me.
I think if I could ask, just to make sure I understand your concerns. So is on the back page, the question about the stormwater, is the concern that roughly 1,000 feet or 1/4 mile is too far away? Okay, so you're seeking something that's closer.
Yeah,
and
1,320 is a far difference in shoreland, which is 250.
Right, and just for explanation of why we ended up here, this is the distinction, or what we have in our current rule when we require additional treatment, around these Class A water bodies and the ORWs, which are the natural resource waters. And that was put in place because for compliance with the water quality standards. For those water bodies, there can be no discharge of sewage or waste. That's in the water quality standards. So how that gets implemented in AOT, alteration of terrain, is by saying, okay, you can't say 0, but you can say, okay, within a 1/4 mile, if we are requiring using the best of best management practices, we can say that there won't be a discharge. So this is the setbacks we have currently, and so we're just bringing them in here to the statute.
So if I could.
Yeah.
So what about 1/8 of a mile?
Yeah.
Is that, I just think you're cutting out so many projects that could happen.
Right.
That have a view of the water, that will have to, nobody wants to do anything to degrade our water quality. I don't think the department's giving much here. I'd like it to be reconsidered.
And I'll be happy to go talk with the water quality staff about why this was chosen, because it was chosen years ago from, it's part of the AOT rules. So we were just incorporating it here. One of the challenges we had with this bill was that all of the details of alteration of terrain are in the rules. And, I know we're trying to, make some changes to those details, and we're doing it within the statute. We thought the permit by notification was the cleanest way to do that, with the least amount of movement.
Is it an eighth of a mile? Is that going to be a lot of heartburn?
I don't think so, but I'd like to talk with the engineers who came up with it. It's all about water, the treatment that can be done in that period of time, or in that distance.
Thank you.
That's just another question on the fee structure. What I had, my take on this might have been wrong to say that part of these was recognizing the costs and doing it in such a way as to ensure that there was not going to be revenue loss by the changes, because that's what kind of came up the last time, right, in the original bill.
Yeah.
So that, I guess what I'm saying is I looked at this and thought, well, this is what was going to be done to keep the department whole, essentially, by doing it at these levels. Is that?
Yeah, this, and also for ability to increase some staffing to speed up the permitting on the larger projects.
Yeah.
I think we all recognize that, this permit by notification will be, a no review process that will free up some time, and with some additional staff, we can cut our overall review times quite a bit, which is in line with the governor's initiative.
Yeah.
So I think that's, we're trying to achieve a couple of things here.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. To follow up on that, I was assuming that the increased fees would cover the projected revenue loss for the state in the fiscal note. But did you consider requesting additional staff in here? Or are you hoping we'll do that in the budget?
So this money would go into the Water Resources Fund, which is a non-lapsing account. And so we don't need to, if we needed to create positions, we could do a 9T position.
What?
A temporary position, and then make it permanent in the next biennium. I think it's too late to make any changes to our budget.
So you could, if I could follow up, you could hire temporary staff without legislative approval.
Correct.
Thank you.
Senator Pearl.
Michael, hello, good to see you again. So in my conversations with Commissioner Crapo, it seemed to me that the changes proposed in here would not result in a net revenue increase to the department, but would be getting you fairly close to where you are now with maybe losing a little bit of revenue. Is that a fair summation of what you feel this amendment does?
Yes, and also the ability to, we have a few vacant positions, and we have one position that's in the budget that was created for this biennium that, has not been on our books up until this biennium, so that would allow us to fill that position.
Okay, and you'd view this more as a reallocation of the fees within the overall program as ending up in essentially a net zero result.
Yes, with fees, it's always hard for us to predict the revenue.
Understood.
And we've had a very strong last few years, and the revenue's been quite good. I don't expect that to be able to sustain indefinitely, and in which case this is absolutely necessary to have funding enough to staff all the positions in the program.
One further.
Well,
and so from that, I would glean that many of your projects fall within that 100 to 150,000 foot area, and that would, again, talking about freeing up your time, that would allow the department to be a little more nimble on the bigger projects.
Correct. We did the calculation for the original bill, and I have it here, which was the 200,000. Where's that spreadsheet? All right, I'm not going to be able to find it right off the bat, but it was about 40% of the applications were under 200,000. So we haven't done it for the 150, but it would, let's just say it's half, or you know, around there. So it would be a good chunk, 20 to 25%.
Thank you.
Anybody else? So I guess we'll hold on to it. We'll do a little bit more work with this, and I appreciate you being here today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy. So just so I'm clear, that we'll be looking into this question of the Class A waters and the setback from that. You know, and what would be, you know, whether an eighth of a mile would be acceptable in terms of meeting the water quality standard objectives.
Yeah, great. And what was the other concern?
I was looking at fees. I'll figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, I know that you know, there'll be other plans put forward in the next couple of days, and I think that some of this might make more sense in the context of that.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you.
So what we'll do is we'll just hold off on this until next week.
Mr. Chair, if I can give you an update on a couple other bills,
Yeah, sure.
if you wouldn't mind. So Senate Bill 65, I'm going to ask that you still hold that. There's continued negotiations between the department and with some of the stakeholders on the solar arrays, and I think we're making pretty good progress, but we need a little bit more time to try and get to hopefully where everybody can be in a good spot. So I'm going to ask that you hold that. Senate Bill 108, I provided you a draft amendment. I have provided that to the department, and they'd like a little bit of time to just reflect on the changes. What I did in that was try to incorporate all of the suggested changes from testimony, and so there's quite a significant amount of work that was done on amendment, but I'd like the department to have a little time to be able to digest that and give them a little feedback. There might still be minor tweaks needed.
That's a question on that.
Yes.
So, my community power bill, which the conversations around those sections, which would be deleted here, and I by the way, I think the 108, what the amendment is, makes a lot of sense. But I guess I'm just wondering, because of what we heard of about the housing, that some of the language there about the definitions of direct benefit and so on, that if we're taking it out of, if those language is going, maybe the department could suggest, well, if that is a concern about those definitions, financial rather direct, just is there another place that it could go in that statute?
All right.
Because in terms of the issues that 108 was addressing, I think this amendment makes sense. But then I started to seem like there was some, because of my bill, there were some ancillary effects.
I admittedly did not cross-reference
Me
the two
neither.
prior to this,
What did I know?
but the department has acknowledged that they're aware of your concern and they'll provide feedback accordingly.
Yeah, so just.
Thank you for raising
whatever.
How about 107?
So Senator Rosenwald, did you end up getting any different language? We were waiting for the department to come back. The Fish and Game Department was going to come back with a suggested recommendation, if I recall. Is that correct?
I wasn't sure they were going to change the language. This was some information about how the funds were.
Yeah, it was a clarification that.
I looked at the report. And do you remember, Cindy, what you?
So you were concerned about all federal funds, the interest from all federal funds?
Oh, yeah, because they get a lot of federal funds.
Yes.
And really, we were interested in the non-game species fund. Sorry. We were interested in the non-game species fund.
Yeah.
But the bill, as currently drafted, says any federal funds.
Well, my recollection was that Fish and Game was going to take a look at this and talk to the DOJ and come back, or something they were, I think.
I haven't heard from them.
I have not either.
So I think there are two things that came up with that. I think your particular question about all federal funds, it's on page 2 of the hearing report, that he said that, there is this distinction between game and non-game, and that this bill would not change. The vast majority of those funds are going to game programs. This bill would have nothing to do with those. This is just the non-game side of it. So I think in terms of that, the bill doesn't need to be changed to that. Then the second question that you raised, Senator Pearl, was about well, where are these funds coming from and how many do we have and so on and so forth, which seems to me to be a kind of a larger question about the department rather than about the bill itself. But we can just follow up with them and see what they have to say. But I do think that original question was answered.
I'm comfortable enough passing this as is. It's gonna come to finance, and if we wanna.
I would want to change it in finance to make it
And I wouldn't be opposed to
specifically
that.
clear that it's funds that become available for the non-game.
Yeah.
Okay, before we do that, the previous bill, we had motions to pass.
Oh, I withdraw.
Oh, same. I'm sorry, I forgot.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Is there a motion on 107?
I'll move on to pass.
Second. Second by Senator McCarthy. Discussion, we've already done.
Yes, we did.
And so, all in favor of, to pass, on 107 FN?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chairman, maybe we're not in a hurry. I just sitting here looking at it online, 5 in the bill. I know we're in the middle of a vote, but, you know, I think what it says, which become available from the federal government for such purposes. I mean, we could just add, I think it needs to add a couple words there. Why don't we just wait, if you wouldn't mind, and we'll get.
Can they do that in finance?
Since all
It's
Well,
not
we can do
going
it
to
in
go to
finance.
finance.
I just we want to make it.
I'm looking at the fiscal note, and it's an indeterminable, so I
Yeah.
bet you it's not going to come to
Yes,
finance.
so I think it's a
So
really easy fix, but I think.
we
why
could
don't
do a
it here?
committee amendment.
Well, we have 3 votes positive, so I would ask for reconsideration on this vote.
So moved.
Second.
You have to have this vote.
I did.
Okay.
So moved.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Is there a second to reconsider?
Okay, I'm moving reconsider. Do we have?
Second.
Second.
All right. So you have to take a vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None.
Hearing the concerns raised and the fact that this may not go to finance, I'm fine with holding off, but Senator Rosenwald, would you like to work on the language real quick and bring us something next week?
Yes.
Would you be willing to do that?
Yes.
That would satisfy your concern?
And I really think if you ask Dan to just add federal government as, as appropriate to the non-game or something.
Yeah, something
It's just
like
a
that.
short
Yeah,
phrase.
ask LBA.
I recall suggesting something similar to that, and there was a little concern that whether they were gonna be able to do that.
They're not here, but I'll go see them.
Let's make it clear.
Okay. So.
Good try, Mr.
We got
Chairman.
one bill done today.
Good try.
It's amazing.
Senator Waters. All right, motion to come out of exec.
So moved. Second by? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All in favor of dismiss?
That's up to you, sir.
Yeah. Aye. You are dismissed. Thank you. So I got a lot of work to do here in this committee here.
I took my brother all the way to.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Matter of fact, we got more work.